everyone. Welcome to Hippo Brain, where we have hippo-sized conversations with hippo-sized brains. And today with Jaimit and me is Gulrez. Until recently, Gulrez was Chief Investment and Strategy Officer at Affle, a publicly listed company doing phenomenally well. But what we want to start with first is Gulrez's time and when he was running Resultrix. So he founded Resultrix, built it to scale, and then sold it to Publicis. Gulrez, so first provocative question for you. Why did you sell?
Hey, hi Rajesh, and hi everyone. First, let me congratulate you on doing a fantastic job with Hippo Brain. I think it's a great initiative, and I'm glad and extremely honored to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me for this episode. Yes, about Resultrix. I started Resultrix in 2008. We grew it to roughly about 127 people in about 4 years across US, Singapore, Dubai, Bombay, and Delhi, India being largely the operational hub. And when we were in 2011, late 11 and early 12, we were already the largest. When I say largest, I mean the independent agencies. When you look at the billing or in terms of Google and Facebook, the amount of advertising that we were controlling, we were the largest. And then we were pitching for a number of global accounts. And number one challenge that we faced was how do we provide support to, let's say, Adidas in 30 countries or probably BMW in 40 countries. So that expansion to other geographies at that point of time in 2012 was a challenge. We were already working with Microsoft in about 29 countries, but the good part was we were right next to Microsoft globally in Seattle, right? So we were able to manage that. And remember, I'm still talking about 2012. Amazon did not enter India, and Flipkart was yet to become the Flipkart that we know, right? The internet penetration was still at much lower levels. So in order to expand further, we thought it'll be a good idea to align ourselves with one of the other big groups. Touchwood, and I'm really thankful to God in this that we had offers from all the large groups because they all were looking to enter India at that point of time. And if you remember, number of acquisition happened in, let's say, about 6 to 12 months. So that's why, the important reason was if we need to grow globally, let's align ourselves with a bigger group. And that was one reason. Also remember that that was my first startup, right? And I still call myself as the first generation entrepreneur. So the vision was still limited. I think the amount of knowledge, whatever knowledge we had running the business and growing to about 150 people, with that, we thought it'll be a good idea if we can get aligned with a bigger group. That was really the logic of, or the reasoning behind why we sold Resultrix.
I think that was one of the big deals, of course, at that time. And then you spent some time with Zenith Optimedia as part of Publicis, and you were building that business part out. So tell us, how was that experience, the transition from running your own business, okay, where as an entrepreneur, you have sort of the daily challenges which are there, and overnight, you're now part of a huge global operation.
Right. So, this process change does not happen when you get aligned. It actually happens, Rajesh, let's say about roughly 9 months before that, right? Because if you are thinking of aligning yourself with a bigger group, you need to have enough processes in the company which are global standards, and you need to adhere to them, right? So I think we started transitioning quite early in 2011 to make ourselves suited for a global investor as well. When you're running company on your own, obviously you have a lot of freedom. And thankfully, I must say that congratulate Publicis also on this, that when you're running as part of Publicis, they give you a lot of freedom as well. For us, and as you rightly mentioned, that I was aligned to Zenith Optimedia. So what happens is that whenever these big groups acquire an entity, they try and align it with one of the mainline groups. So for example, when Convonix happened, it was aligned to Starcom. When Resultrix happened, we were aligned to Zenith Optimedia, and Zenith Optimedia largely because they had a digital entity already, which is one of the largest digital entities in the world today. It's called Performix. So in US and Singapore, Resultrix was aligned with Performix. In Dubai and in India, we were aligned with Zenith Optimedia, and we literally became Performix of that region. So it was indeed very interesting, Rajesh. They in fact asked me, obviously after 1 year of acquisition, they asked me that if I can move now to Singapore and look at much bigger and much broader picture. So I moved to Singapore and I was looking after the entire APAC region, which means 14 markets, as the Chief Growth and Development Officer for Zenith Optimedia. It was very interesting. I mean, you obviously are much, playing with much bigger numbers and much bigger brands, and the scales are very different.
Gulrez, while you obviously answer the question, I'm trying to understand a little bit more on the personal side of it. So as an entrepreneur, you can do various different things. You can give increments which are non-market linked or non-linear and say, Chal, I like you, you're doing well, here, take it. If you like a client here, okay, I'm going to quote this and take it. I think we had Rajiv Dingra on our show and he also spoke about the alignment. I think the first thing he said was their mail servers and our mail servers didn't match. And he was very clear that I want to be different yet part of this. Now, how did you face any of these issues? Did you see that challenge? And was there some mental, I don't know, gymnastics that you had to do to try and jump over some of those hurdles?
Oh, yes, it happens. It definitely happens. So on the technology piece, I think we focused a lot on technology. So there were not too many technological challenge. But yeah, I think on people and processes, as you rightly mentioned, Janet, and I'm sure you know from the vast experience that you yourself have working with conglomerates, you need to adhere to processes. It cannot happen that, if somebody did really well, when it comes to appraisal, you can give them 50% or 70%. It doesn't happen like that. You get a budget and you need to adhere to it, right? So that's obviously our challenge. But it's exciting to work with a bigger group because you get to learn a lot, right? You need to manage a lot. I think for us, specifically Resultrix, the biggest challenge was in invoicing, right? Because when you run on your own, you're very, very particular about cash flows. And the basic of the cash flow is invoice early, right? Let's say if you complete the month on the 31st, when you're running as an entrepreneur, would ensure that in the next 5 working days, the invoice goes to the client. Now, it can be 90% accurate because, in digital, everything needs to be closed, publisher invoices, the backend, et cetera, et cetera. And when you're running it as an entrepreneur, you can still manage it with the client. But when you're running with let's say, part of Publicis Group or any other bigger group, man, that takes a little bit of time. Those processes, I can surely say that takes a little bit of time.
आप हंस रहे हो लेकिन आपका दिल तो रो रहा है.
I mean, आप समझ सकते हो पीछे की feeling क्या है.
So no, you're right. I think even Rajesh spoke. Profits don't kill a business. Cash flow kills it.
Absolutely.
Because you're making money, but the amount of media that you're buying and you're throughputing, I think the cash flow itself, if you're not aligned, you are in trouble.
Correct. You're absolutely correct. And as I said, cash flow originates from invoicing. Because its entire cycle is linked, right? If you invoice on time, the client receives the invoice on time, the client finance team receives the invoice on time, the finance team asks for the validation, you support the validations, then you go ahead and collect the payment in time. So it's a cycle. Now imagine in a scenario when you're invoicing, let's say after 45 days or 60 days. So the entire flow goes for a toss because you still have to pay the publishers, let's say Google or Facebook, depending on the credit line, whether it's 60 days or 45 days. If you don't pay, they will hit the pause button, right? Which means you still need to manage that piece. So totally aligned with you. And but we managed.
So एक बात बता, just you being this side, that side, small, big, everything. Some people are still starting smaller boutique agencies within the digital space. Some are still getting into performance and getting in. Do you think कि वो ज़माना गया? So now, do you think the small agency for the digital space, which was a niche at one point of time, does not exist anymore? Or do you still see that there are gaps? And I think a small agency with reasonable I don't know what you were thinking. On the ball thinking can still work?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So, um, I always thank my stars that I was in the right industry at the right point of time, or probably slightly ahead of the time. So we started with 5 people and we could grow because being a boutique agency, you take a little time to grow, right? And we focused on one thing. But there are still today, when you look at it, digital in India or APAC is fairly old, right? Until unless you're specializing on particular thing, the chances of you breaking through a big client is very difficult, right? So my advice to the entrepreneurs who are starting now is focus on one thing. That's really important, and get your in a very crude word, I used to call it parachute clients, right? When you're jumping into a new thing, if you can get a client which can support your finances, right? Let's say for the first 3 months, that's really important.
And who promises to pay on time?
No, probably advance. Right. So again, this was a very innovative thing that we did, Jain, that some of the big clients, I wouldn't name them now because I'm sure they will get questions, but we'd strike a deal that if they pay us in advance, we will probably give them, let's say, 2% or 3% discount, right? So let's say if an agency, it was different those days, we probably could manage, let's say 12% or 15%. Today, it's much lower. But let's say even at 12-15%, if the client or the client finance team is getting 2% discount, that's a substantial percentage, right? For the finance team. All finance team has to do is either pay in advance or pay in time, right? So it helps the cash flow for you. Client and client finance team gets a lot of benefit. So it's all about being innovative in how you sustain your business. So my advice to the young entrepreneurs would be, number one, focus on one thing, specialize in that. Even if you're trying to get into performance, there are huge number of opportunities today and in future. We are very innovative in digital. It will keep coming up. So try and focus on one thing, try and get a parachute client, and absolutely must to manage your cash flows in the first 6 months. If you do that, you're in it for a long term.
So Gulrez, I want to just take you back.
Sure.
You said you're a first generation entrepreneur.
Right.
How, making the call to become an entrepreneur.
Right.
It's a really big thing. A lot of people think about it. The dream is there, but then the comfort, the cushion of a monthly salary, or the sort of pangs of the EMI hold them back. For some reason, that leap is not done.
Correct.
How did you make this decision? What drove you?
Interesting, very interesting question, Rajesh. And I probably have to go a little to give you a background of where I come from, right? So I come from a very humble family background. My father had 7 siblings, and in their generations, there were only 2 or 3 professions which were well known. And you will not believe that all of those 8 kids became teachers, became either headmasters or principals of their respective schools and retired. So in my family history, if you know, one profession was teaching, right? And everybody used to doing a job, something like starting on your own and being an entrepreneur was unheard of, especially in something to do with digital media. In 2008 was very, very difficult. It took me number of years to explain to my father and my family what is it exactly that I do, because Google was not that popular. Remember, today is very different. Everybody is on the internet, thanks to Geo. But that 2008 was very, very different. So it was a big plunge for me, but I took the baby steps first. As you know, I started my career with a company called Web Chutney. Touchwood was very successful there. My first client there was Make My Trip. And at that point of time, Make My Trip that we know today was probably roughly about 450 square feet in a place in Delhi called Hoskars, specifically in Adichini. And Sachin Bhatia and Deep Kalra and Sachin Bhatia that we know used to sit across, and we used to plan the campaigns. And I personally launched the first flight for Make My Trip, which was from US to India. And then obviously after a year, we launched the Indian operations for Make My Trip. So that was my starting of digital journey. And then a very good mutual friend of ours, Mr. Vivek Bhargava, he's one of my mentors as well. I started with them. It was a company called Communicate, to which now you probably know as iProspect. I joined them when they were just about 20 people, grew that to about 110 people. So by doing these two, let's say, trials of growing it, let's say from under 10 people to roughly around 100 people or plus 50 people, gave me a lot of confidence, right? And I saw that there is a need in the market, and we probably could fulfill that requirement. And that's how I took the plunge. That, it's probably a different conversation that the time I started was the worst recession in the history. But yeah, 2008 was when I started Resultrix.
There are two things that stop people from entrepreneurship. One is the disease of EMI, and the second is the disease of monthly salary. ये दोनों से used to हो जाता है, so difficult.
Very, very difficult. You are in a comfort zone that as soon as you get the monthly salary, your finances are planned. On the reverse hand, you have to pay the money. So when I started Resultrix, my wife tells me that I used to sleep talk either about media planning or the worry of paying salaries on time, because I had a rule that we should release the salaries in the first 3 days. And as I told you, on the first day, we were about 5 people. By the end of the first month, we were about 8 or 9. So that was a big worry. And so imagine in 2008.
And what were the early learnings as an entrepreneur? I mean, many times, people have someone, say, in the extended family, etc., who can guide them. Like I learned a lot from my father. I saw him as an entrepreneur over 15, 20 years, trying out many different ventures. And I saw that, he succeeded in a few, but he failed in a lot. But that failure never sort of pulled him down. So that whole fear of failure was not there. Even I had failed in my early years as an entrepreneur. And you succeeded with your first venture. So what are the things that you sort of did in the early days to make sure that this whole fear of failure, and in a way, an entrepreneur is going to reduce failure every day. You're making sure that it's not about success as much as I don't want to fail. What are the things that you did, which would be very helpful to actually learn from?
So two things there. And Rajesh, as you rightly said, this is very individualistic and people have different sorts of motivation where they love from. For me, and I've always believed for an entrepreneur, there should not be ever a plan B, right? You have to have a plan A, and that's the only plan. The moment you think of a backup or something like, if this doesn't work, I'll do this, you don't give your 100%. Second thing for me was a survival. And, survival, when you talk about survival, especially for people like us in India, we have to make sure that we give, let's say, not 100%, but probably 200% of everything that we can do. These two things work really well for me. No plan B, you have to make it work, and survival, that this really means your survival. So whatever you do, make sure that you take the right decisions, and decisions that can affect in your long term. As I said, and I briefly touched upon it earlier, that 2008 was worst recession. When I was responsible for Communicate 2's India business, business was largely doing very well, but that was in 2007. And when I was starting 2008, my entire foundations or the business plan was based on exposure to BFSI, banking, financial services, and insurance industry. And the moment I start, they said, okay, sorry, but we don't have any budgets because it was the worst recession. So they're the survival instinct that whatever you have to do, do it. But make sure that you and your business and the people you are associated with, the families of these people are dependent on you. They survive. So I think that worked really well for me.
I think that was great. I think in terms of the fact that many times, what people say is that the best time to actually start a business is during the toughest of times. I think, you not only started in 2008, but the growth that you did in the first 3 to 4 years was just phenomenal. And how do you sort of manage high growth, especially when you were doing business which was for customers globally? I mean, you had the operations in India, of course, but you were talking to customers with operations in multiple markets. How was that experience?
Indeed, an interesting question, Rajesh. I always believe that your founding team, the core members, should be very strong. And when I say strong, I mean you can literally, blindfolded, you can trust them. that no matter what will happen, they will still be there with you. So although we sold the company in 2012, but the people I'm still in touch with as of today in 2021, I'm still in touch with them. We meet often, we party together. So that's the bond you shared with your founding team. And coming to your question, that when you are serving multinational clients, it's important that you don't become a roadblock. So a lot of entrepreneurs, what they try and do is that the decision-making powers is centralized, which means that you yourself would become a roadblock, right? And it's easy to look in the hindsight that we did the right stuff, but it's really the foundation that you take certain aspects of the business and you own that. But you also let other co-founders own their responsibilities. And the moment that happens, it's like, you're running it very smoothly and ensure that the success is there.
Yeah, what you're talking about is not centralizing a lot of authority and allowing a lot of people down the line. But I'll tell you what I have also seen, and some of the entrepreneurs in the digital space also struggle with. So intuitively, instinctively, I think digital is what younger than you people tend to get. So you just have to go younger. And with people who are younger, you get a lot more common mistakes that people make. So it's always difficult to put them in front of your top client. So I'm sure you would have had this issues कि यार ये मेरा सबसे important client है और मुझे जाना चाहिए and I should always be there, and these are big guys, but the best ideas, the best execution, and the best kind of breakthrough can always come from somebody younger. And how would you have managed that? I mean, I'm not so sure when you're a young startup trying to do everything right, what happens then?
So thank you for asking me this question. So for us, Jen, it was exactly the reverse. And I made sure that wherever I've worked afterwards also, I follow the same. See, the responsibilities of the founder or the CEO is much vast, much bigger than just taking care of each client, right? So I made sure that I'm only looking at my top 5 clients. Anything, and that largely in terms of either revenue or profitability, the quantum of it, anything other than that, you have to ensure that your team is managing it. I mean, what can go wrong? They might make a mistake. Let's say you talk about young people, I totally correct. The young people go in a presentation, they would make a mistake, but they are still energetic, they're still enthusiastic, and they're going to learn from it, right? Don't worry, the CEO is there. If there is an escalation, multiple levels of escalation, you will get to know the business is not going anywhere. Let's say you're sitting in front of a big client, and let's say the social media executive, because typically the young people are in the social media or different sort of upcoming media, and they make a mistake. The client also knows it's the enthusiasm that is talking, right? So don't worry about it. But as a CEO, you need to ensure that you prioritize. And when you talk about prioritization, is when you business expansion, geographical expansion, a lot of that comes through. But if you're stuck in managing your day-to-day client operations, you're not doing the right job. And that's personal belief. So coming back to your question, let your younger generation be exposed to the big clients. Okay, they might make mistake, but let them learn from it. The amount of exposure, the amount of learning they get from it, it's tremendous. Again, don't be a roadblock. Let them experience it. They will learn, they'll grow, and you will have the best ever retention you can think of because they are learning on the job.
I think it's a great collection of advice. If I just pull it together, you started with the point around invoicing, and it's a great point. I always talk about cash flow, but this whole point that invoice early, I think is sometimes missed out in ensuring that the cash flows come on time. I think parachute clients, I think that's a great phrase. The plan A only, okay, ensuring that there is no backup option. I mean, it's like I used to tell people way back when I was coming from the US, I said, if you're returning from the US, please cut up your green card at the airport. So that you don't even are tempted to go back. Then you'll make things work in India. I think great point. The focus on survival, a very strong founding team. And this point that you made is that as CEO, you kept the focus on the top 5 clients and let your rest of the team essentially deal with everyone else so they learn faster. And also it gives you then the space to think about future growth rather than being bogged in by day-to-day operations.
Absolutely. Very well summarized, Rajesh, but the foundation remains innovation. So just on your one point, the first point that you said about invoicing, I'll tell you a small trick that we applied and it worked very well. That normally when you send the invoice, you send it on a blank or white A4 paper, right? We used to send the invoice on a bright pink or bright green paper.
Seriously?
No, I'm serious about it. You might think it's funny, but fluorescent pink or a fluorescent green paper. Your invoicing team, imagine if they have 50 invoices from different clients and you saying that, oh, I'm calling from Resultrix. The first response is, oh, I didn't receive the invoice, or your invoice is lost. Correct? You all have to say is, in the pile of invoices, do you see that fluorescent pink? That's me.
That is the greatest hack I've ever seen to get your... आज क्या भेजते हैं? Green color का PDF.
Thankfully, I don't look into the invoicing, but yeah, we still remain. The point is innovation.
I think great point. I think these are those sort of growth hacks which everyone needs when you're building out the company. So I think that was so you did that. You built your company. Okay, sold it to Publicis. Spent a few years at Zenith Optimedia, and then what?
So then what happens, Rajesh, when you get acquired, and typically for agencies, and broadly speaking for a services business, it's not a one-time deal. It's not that you pay the money and you get out of it, right? It's like you're aligned for either 3 years, 5 years, or 7 years, depending on your negotiation ability. So typically you have an earn-out period and you have a non-compete period. So I completed my earn-out period, but even after that, I could not come back to the digital industry. And when I was based out of Singapore, every next person that I used to meet has something to do with financial industry, right? I mean, huge, crazy experience that you get in Singapore if you're into finance industry. So it so happened, and it was an opportunity. I collaborated with a friend of mine, and we launched a company called Performanata, which is basically performance-based fund management based on trading. And the company was based out of Singapore and India. So we built a team in India, which used to come up with strategies. We used to back test to about 5 years, figure out if it's right or not, and then used to implement, invest client funds as well. And then we transition it into something called as algorithmic trading. Nothing to do with the digital industry. Completely shifted to financial industry because of my non-compete clause with Publicis Group. But yeah, algorithmic trading was the next big gig.
I'm not going to ask you whether you made money or lost money on algorithmic, nor am I going to ask you कि तूने index beat किया चुपचाप बैठ के. But I'm very interested. Affle में क्या किया?
All right, but I still answered the question that you didn't ask. So the logic that company is still running answers the question. Yes, Affle. So, Affle, we used to work together at the time of running Resultrix, which means till 2012. But when my non-compete was about to get over, I met the Affle team, and I really liked the team and the vision the team had it. And it so happened that I was close with Anuj and Anuj, both the co-founders of Affle. So we decided that I'll come on board. And I joined Affle as the Chief Strategy and Investment Officer. So, rest is history, yaar. I mean, I can talk a lot more about it, but yeah, we just diversified a lot. The first step was to take the company to public, diversify a lot, make sure that instead of one aspect of digital, we're looking after much more geographical expansion and a lot more. Affle is something that I'm sure all of you are following closely. Trust me, when I get up in the morning, I get more messages from my friends and relatives and everybody that I know in the industry that what's happening with Affle and the share price today rather than, yeah. So very exciting journey with Affle.
I have also handled calls from family members who basically say there are two stocks which everyone used to talk about, Affle and India Mart.
Right.
Essentially, ये खरीदना चाहिए क्या? because they have no idea of digital commodities market mein hai ya kidhar aur hai. But these are seen as the two sort of hot stocks. Of course, now we've expanded that. There are multiple other stocks on the digital side which are doing extraordinarily well. And
Correct.
you, Gulrez, drove acquisitions for Affle among various things that you were doing. I think the way you looked at acquisitions, I think was very interesting when we had a chat earlier. I'd love for you to talk about that, because I think it's a great framework that you put together for looking at acquiring companies and growing the core business of Affle.
Correct. Rajesh, the first step is to take the negativity out of AdTech, right? When we're still talking about, let's say, 2018 or 2019, AdTech was not a very positive sentiment from investors. I think most of the investors in the last 5-7 years did not make good returns from AdTech. So it was still a negative. When with Affle coming out of IPO, opening it to public and opening the books to public, it was a big transition, at least for the APAC industry. So that we managed that negativity first. And the second aspect was, and this is common knowledge, that when you become public, what happens is that your equity becomes a currency, right? In order to acquire next company, you probably don't have to raise a lot of money. You can acquire with your equity as the tradable currency as well. All you have to do is figure out the right companies or the right products. And there are a number of strategies. And when you're looking at acquisition, it can be either a product acquisition, it can be geographic expansion, it can be revenue acquisition, or it can be technology acquisition. And depending on what your objective is, look for the right deals, right? And till the time your foundations are correct, which means you're looking at the right fundamentals in the opportunity, the chances are you will be successful.
So I know Affle is listed in, we wouldn't want to go too much deeper into Affle finances or stuff like that, but I'm a little more curious on the acquisitions. Any kind of interesting stories on how did you zone in on acquisitions and how do you look at them, and any insights and learnings there, Gulrez?
Sure. So without divulging too much of strategical information, but I would say that our CEO, Mr. Anuj Khanna, is very particular about the focus, right? Let's say you were in one aspect of the business, which is user acquisition, and you have to grow your product penetration for a client. The immediate next opportunity, what comes to mind, let's say in 2019, was retargeting business, right? So there we were focusing a lot more on acquiring retargeting companies. The first acquisition we did was Vizuri. And when we realized that it's doing well, we came up with the idea, okay, now we have one product, but is there a way we can consolidate the offerings in the market? So we got to know that at that point of time, there was only another company called Revex, which is the largest programmatic as well as the retargeting firm. So immediate opportunity was there and we made the most of it. So again, focus is very, very important. And when you're looking for acquisition, it's like you have loads of money in your pocket and you're entering a shopping mall, right? You need to know specifically what is it that you're looking for, right? It might happen that you enter a supermarket and you buy all the stuff which you don't need. So that's where I think the guidance and mentorship from Anuj Khanna and the entire direction was very, very clear that let's look for the acquisition or the products that make sense or are complementary to the nature of Affle's business.
Can get, and we've seen companies go nuts and berserk on it also. Okay, paisa hai, currency hai, there is a value to it, there is a growth, 1 + 1 = 1,000. But when you're actually zoning in on a company and you probably believe that chal product theek hai, ya tech theek hai, when you're actually buying, there are far more nuances to the game. Any insights over there? People, processes, balance sheet, customers, क्या देखना चाहिए?
Jainit, वो भी बाद में आता है. The first question is why that company or why that product? Why are you interested in a product? Why are you interested in a company? And what will you do with it? So I personally have always believed that one member of your core team should be able to work with your target or the opportunity for the next couple of years to make sure that whatever vision you had about that particular product or company, he realizes. So for example, let's say we all know that Rajesh is doing very well, touch wood, and hopefully, inshallah, we will see Rajesh also coming out with the IPO soon. Let's say with that, you start acquiring, right? But when you are acquiring either to grow your balance sheet or to grow your revenue share, it's very important that whatever acquisition you make, it is successful. And how do you define success is up to you. Either it's profitability, revenue expansion, or it's geographical expansion, right? Those foundations has to be very clear. Why are you looking at an opportunity? What will it do for you in the short term and the long term? And how do you see it panning out within your own umbrella brand, right? Because the moment the companies grows, the cultures are diverse, you still need to integrate all of them into the single culture. It's not an easy task. And that's why I say that one member of your core team, if I can use the word loosely, sponsor that acquisition for the next 2 years. That yes, I will be responsible for it in every KPI, in every metric that we are doing this acquisition for.
And I think one of the strategies that also Affle has done very well is essentially international growth. So basically using products acquired through an acquisition in one country, expanding them to other countries and vice versa. And that's a great strategy. You talked about the 4 things, product, geo, revenues, and tech. And obviously geographical growth becomes very important because ad tech today is not just limited to a single country.
Correct.
So that's worked out very well also for Affle.
Correct. And this was a conscious strategy, Rajesh, because what happens is that you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, right? So we are very focused on the developing countries, and especially in India, but we still want to make sure that we are not limited by a region, right? So in order for you to diversify, you get a lot of knowledge from different international market, you get fantastic technology, and you also get to learn from them. And that's important for your own growth in your domestic or in your core markets as well. And opportunities can come from anywhere in the world. And today, all of us have learned a new way of working in the COVID, right? All of us are working from home in the last, I would say, 10 months or so. We never thought it was possible earlier. Personally, for me, I can tell you, I used to be at least 3 or 4 different locations every month. So every Monday, I used to fly out at 6 a.m. and used to be in a different office, whether it was Delhi, Bangalore, Dubai, or any other office, and used to travel a lot. But today we've learned that we can still be based out of one location and still manage work very effectively, right? So it's all about innovating yourself. So when you are looking at international acquisition, be careful that there will be a lot of international culture that will come your way. The way international teams work is a little different, but be open. If you're open to the change, if you're ready to accept them, it'll be a fantastic marriage.
Yeah, and it's also even more difficult because you're doing well in India. India is growing. Sab theek chal raha hai. International many times is seen as an attractive distraction. in sense of, your core markets are here, and it costs money and cultural integration to go in. Do you think for a lot of places you would still recommend go for it, or do you still say tread with care, look at domestic first, hold your feet strong, or would you say go aggressive, world is your oyster?
No, absolutely. Focus on your core first. And you have to have your core team so strong that even if you're looking at an international opportunity, your core will not be, will still be stable. Nothing will shake the core. And be very careful, as I said earlier, that why are you looking at that international opportunity, right? And thanks to Anuj Khanna again, I would say that he is very clear that why are you looking at that opportunity? It's because that if we can launch that international product in the domestic market, in your home market, you'll be able to grow the product and the revenue from that itself. And that provides you the opportunity for integration. That provides you the opportunity for cultural integration. And that works out very well, right? So be careful is the number one. Explore your local market because that's much easier to do. And if you look at the history of Affle, we did number of home acquisition first before we ventured out to international, because it obviously is a learning process for all of us. And then when you are going international, you know what are the things that you should be careful for. And again, but basic remains why international, right? So be particular about it.
Gulrez, I want to change tracks a little bit. I think you've been on the front lines of the world of ad tech and mobile for the last 17 years. So I think take us through a little bit of the history, how things have changed, and what is it that we can look for going forward? I mean, mobile is now, I mean, you go back to the early days, I think iPhone, of course, was the game changer. Then you have Android. It's there with everyone now. But how has the evolution been? You've seen it on the front line. So how has that evolution been, and what do you think of going forward? What are the key trends?
Rajesh, when I used to sell digital initially, I used to explain people what Google is. And I'm talking about pre-Google IPO days. And typically advertiser used to say that, oh, should we do digital? Should we put money on Google? And how do they work? And depending on the market, and if you're lucky and if you're a good seller, you would still get away by selling Google on CP. And we all know that we have to pay on CPC. But in some of the lower developed markets, you still can used to sell Google on CP and still get away with it. So I'm talking about those days, right? And 2004 end and 2005 early. Touchwood, and as I said earlier, I'm really lucky to be in this industry and I've seen it all. I would say we've evolved. Right? And we've evolved as consumers, we've evolved as advertisers, and we've evolved as brands, right? And the big change that happened in India was 2016 and 17, right? And I always give this example in some of the panels that I've been part of, that there are about 160 countries where there is a measurement of internet speed and per capita internet consumption. So let me ask this question to you. Till 2016, can you take a guess where India was out of those 160 countries, both in terms of internet consumption per person, as well as the internet speed?
160, I think I know what your way of getting at.
Yeah, we were 159. Out of 160 countries, we were ranked 159.
And it's easy to forget those days, I mean, but yeah, absolutely right.
I just want to know which country hum log beat kiya.
Right. And today we are number one. We are ahead of US, we are ahead of China, both in terms of, I would say definitely in terms of per capita internet consumption. But that's a huge.
The right? Geo effect?
The geo effect, right. I mean, what you see today, the entire e-commerce industry, the entire social media industry, and when I say social media, I include the entertainment, which is short format and the long format. How are you able to grow these businesses? Yeah, you're able to grow these businesses because people are consuming internet. And which comes to the foundation, right? That there is infrastructure. And if I draw the same parallel, there is another area in the world, which is Africa, which is waiting for the same thing to happen. There is no geo in Africa, right? And I would say that in the next 5 years, when the entire Africa come online, you will see a different internet world emerging out of it. Because every area, I mean, we saw TikTok, the kind of growth it had in very short time. And when TikTok got banned by the Indian government, we saw 3 or 4 in the first week itself. And then there were about 12 apps which were launched, which were competitors of TikTok. We saw the entire industry emerge as an opportunity. I would assume going forward, the same thing will happen. As the newer generation come online, there will be newer platforms, newer techniques, newer digital areas, right, that we are yet to explore. And let me give you a parallel today. The digital world that we live in today, right? Could you imagine that digital world, let's say 3 years back, even in 2016 or 17? Could you imagine what you're doing on mobile today, even in 2016 and 17? The answer would be probably no. The amount of transaction, the amount of data, the way we are living in digital, right? And it's yet to evolve. Imagine what connected devices would do, right? I mean, we're already talking to the advanced advertisers on connected TV, right? And again, let me ask you a question. Do you have any form of dish TV at your home, whether it's dish TV or Tata Sky?
Gone in my house. It's
No, gone in my house as well.
Gone in my house as well. So today, the way we are consuming content on our TV is also changed. Is that an indication that the advertising on the TV would also change, right? And it's happening in the US market already. So if I go back to Rajesh's question, we are going to experience a lot of changes in advertising. Be prepared, be ready, and be open to that change.
Should we go extremely aggressive on YouTube?
You know, it's funny. I would not name a client, but till 2010, in India, we used to sell YouTube as the 7th channel. Because for the big advertisers, the top 6 channels were frozen, right? I mean, when I say channels, I mean the TV channels. They were like fixed. We are going to put this much amount of money there for sure. So we used to position YouTube as the 7th channel till 2010. And you look at today, right? You don't have to sell it. I always give this example to my team that Google and YouTube is like you're driving in a desert and there's only one petrol pump.
Yeah, there is. I agree with you. To some extent, one can argue YouTube hai and Facebook hai. The
Right.
Facebook ecosystem, where significant amount of audio visual advertising can make some amount of brand impact, as opposed to, we were discussing with Prem, one of the planners at Ogilvy, one of our Hippo Brains, that there is marketing. There is no such thing as digital marketing. There is marketing, and at best you can talk about bottom of the funnel digital sales. But if you're looking at marketing today in the environment, the Google and the Facebook environment are significant. They're growing and they are difficult to not want to be in bed with.
Oh, absolutely. And we all talk about today that what all information we share with Google, right? But you'll be surprised with the amount of information we share with Facebook, right? And, you know, so you spoke about YouTube, but what about Facebook Watch? That's the only platform which can challenge YouTube today, right? And likewise, Facebook has one or the other product which is competing in the advertising world or with Google, and that's huge. And as I said, we are still yet to see a lot of them because, you know, what happens with iceberg, right? You only see the tip, but this huge structure which is underneath it. So Facebook, if you see the way they have evolved in the last 5 years, and each month, if I'm not wrong, they would have made 47 acquisitions in the last 5 years. It'll be very interesting for you and for the audience to read about those acquisitions and what areas do they belong in, right? So you will see Facebook and the way they're trying to grow in the next, I would say, a couple of years or probably the next 5 years.
Gulrez, you know, normally as an outsider, when you think of the world of ad tech, the first reaction is always that, okay, there is Google, there is Facebook, and they basically make all the money. And therefore, it is almost impossible for anyone else to build a business out of it. I mean, the story goes back to the Wintel days. You know, Windows, Microsoft used to make 80% of industry profits, Intel probably 30%, and everyone else had to lose 10%. So you've been at the front lines again, and you've carved very interesting spaces in this world. You know, how have you managed to do that? And what are the sort of, how do you survive against these two behemoths?
Rajesh, again, the very question that you have to survive against these two people is the wrong starting point, according to me. Because when the competition is so big, then you don't have to compete with them. You have to build services that are on top of these platforms, right? So whether it's Google or Facebook, you have to build your portfolio in such a way that you are still utilizing what they have to offer. You are still complementing the services or the platform that you're building on top of these platforms and making money out of it. You don't have to compete with the 70 or 80%, right? The first idea is that, can I get some share out of these? And then I will focus on the remaining percentage of the advertising budget. So today, if you look at any big advertisers in India, I would say between Google and Facebook would be roughly 75%, 75%. The first objective for anybody today is not to compete with this. Can I come up with a technology? Can I come up with a product which is on top of these platforms, right? And there are enough opportunities. Today, we all talk about influencer marketing, right? I mean, do you see that as a competition to Instagram or Facebook, or do you see it as a complementing service? It's very important for you to define what you're doing. And the moment you know that you're not competing with these giants, it's an easy roadmap ahead. So first, build your services on top of these services so that you don't have to compete with them. And in the remaining 20-25%, it's easy to capture a share because there's enough and more technology available that you can either build or license it and start operating there.
That's very interesting what you're saying also. To my mind, and especially I'm just hopping back 2 points from what you're saying. We had the geo revolution, and I think in the last 5 years, we have borne the brunt, or I don't know how to put it, of three big things that happened to us, probably as a nation and a psyche, that made us fundamentally change our behavior and mindset. We had geo, we had demon, and now we've had COVID. All three disruptions in many ways have pushed the bar on digital and has given more legs to digital to work with. Would you agree to that, or?
Absolutely. And this has catapulted the adoption of digital in the masses. So in India specifically, what we were thinking as the growth will happen in a non-COVID scenario in the next 5 years has happened in the last 1 year. So if you remember, and it's a funny thing, but it's known in our industry that what demonetization did to, let's say, payment services or digital payment services overnight, I would say the same thing has happened to digital and e-commerce and anything to do with, let's say, I broadly classify that as contactless commerce. Whether it's food tech, fintech, travel tech, or e-commerce, this all comes under the contactless commerce. I would say the adoption of that, your openness to accept and have a transaction or interaction with that service, that's drastically changed in the last 12 months. And that is related to what Rajesh asked me earlier, is the future of digital. It's very exciting. I can surely say that it's very, very exciting.
And Gulrez, you continue to be on the front lines of digital. You've just exited from Affle after spending 2 wonderful years there. So what next for you?
Next for me is 2 things, Rajesh. I'm very, very huge believer of Middle East and Africa as the next coming up market. Without I would say that I would continue to focus on the core market, which is India. But the expansion and the same thing that we spoke about, the digital adoption, I think that will happen in Middle East and Africa. And I would say that the second thing that I'm very bullish about is what you've seen with the entire TikTok, Share Chat, and all these social platforms. I think there is a huge possibility or an opportunity in an area that I loosely classify as influencer marketing. So I'm very bullish about that. I'm investing in a company based out of Middle East and joining them as well. You would see some exciting stuff coming out from here and both the Middle East and India market.
Let's talk a little about influencer marketing. I think I'm glad you brought this up because this is seeing a phenomenal rise in the last, I think, couple of years. And what's the key sort of motivation? If you distill it down to why is influencer marketing so important, how would you put it?
All right. Again, I would correct your statement, Rajesh. It's not only recent years. Let's go back 15 years back, or let's say 20 years back when there was no digital, right? Let's say you're wearing a fantastic blue t-shirt. When I meet you in person, I would say, Rajesh, you look really nice in that t-shirt. Where did you get it from? What brand is it? Right? You would tell me it's that brand, and I would be motivated or tempted to buy it. Right? What is that? that you are an influencer to me. I like what you're doing, so I would follow you, right? It's the oldest form of advertising. Whether you call it peer-to-peer advertising or you call it, let's say, a micro or a nano influencer advertising, that we all are influencers to our immediate circle, right? Just before the call, when we started talking, Jaimit said that he really likes my red glasses. And hopefully he's going to get one of them soon, right?
I was going to ask you that only.
That's probably in my circle. I have this ability to influence the people who are associated with me, right? That's 15 or 20 years back. Today, Rajesh, what has happened is that because of this digital adoption, right, you are able to get these people on the platform. Now, whether you, and I'm talking about all genuine followers, whether you have 500, 5,000 or 5 million, there is a huge opportunity for advertisers and for brands to monetize this, right? That's one way of looking at it. The second way of looking at it, why is it that every single TV ad that you see on the television has a macro influencer, or what we call them celebrities? It's the same. The foundation of advertising is still the same. They get these celebrities, or in technical word, macro influencers, because they are able to influence your decision making. But with digital adoption, I personally believe that this is going to break down further. I mean, there was a joke that in the recently concluded IPL, whenever there was an over break, if there are 5 advertisements, 4 of them will have Akshay Kumar. I mean, I personally love the guy. I have nothing against him. But look at that, because he's able to influence. So he's there. But on the digital, because it gives us the ability to customize the creatives and ability to interact one-on-one or in a smaller segment, do you think there is a huge opportunity which is still untapped? I strongly believe so. And that's the reason that I'm personally investing in a company which is looking into this area.
So Gulrez, let me just push you over there. I think it's very interesting you speak about influencer marketing. To my mind, and help me decipher this. There are 2-3 reasons why I may want to look at influencer marketing. Tell me if the thinking is right or all three or combination. One, CPM buy. He drives X amount of views, full stop. So whether your brand is there present, is it a cheaper way to buy? Is it as expensive or cheap of the kind of target that you would have otherwise spent anywhere else? So you're trying to normalize on CPM. Second, you want brand association. He's damn cool. I want to be cool. And what do? Akshay Kumar is no longer so cool to a millennial as Bhuvan Bam is. Okay, so maybe that's one of the associations. Third is there is a core loyalty. Again, sorry, Bhuvan Bam suddenly popped up in my head when I was thinking influencer, because I remember he was doing for a spectacle brand, and I remember him tweeting that bhai main pahunch raha hu at this mall, and there was like 3,000 people just there. There is a loyalty that influencers tend to drive. To my mind, there are 3. Is there 4, 5 more, or is there a combination of this, or how does a brand look at it when they say influencer marketing karna hai from metric and not just bhai tick mark hai 360 degree ke liye?
I would say depending on the region you're talking about, it can be a tick mark, or it can be, depending on the advertiser, it can be an essential core form of advertising. But let me cover all the 3 things that you mentioned. CPM, it's a payment metric. I would not advise any of your audience or any of the brand metric to just be doing influencer because it's a payment metric based on CPM. What does it do for your brand is more important than how you buy it, right? That's very, very critical. Let me cover the third aspect before covering the second, which is the core loyalty. So let me tell you a small story. My son wanted a laptop, and given that he's about 12 years, he's into gaming. So he researched that what laptop he's going to buy on all the e-commerce, and then said, okay, Papa, let's go and check it out physically. So we checked out Chroma, we checked out, whatever is available in Bombay, all the shops. And finally, he went to Chroma. The decision, the way he made it, is because of that sales guy. Because that model was not in his consideration basket, but the sales guy on the counter was a gamer himself. And he spoke to my son and myself saying that if you're looking for gaming, These are the three things which are more important, whether it's the refresh rate, which is, the entire refreshing of the screen, and the RAM, and the third aspect, whatever. And he was able to associate it with my son, saying that if this is what you're looking, this is what you should get. And I'm a gamer myself, so I will be asking you or telling you to go ahead with this. Although it was probably 10% higher than the original budgeted price, but because the sales guy was a gamer and he was able to associate with the audience, my son went ahead with that purchase.
And the fact that I have a dad, that's damn cool.
Well, that's true. That's true. But the foundation remains that the sales guy, because he was able to associate with the audience, was able to influence the decision. And who was the sales guy? He was the gamer. So he was immediately able to relate. So your third point, which is about the core loyalty, is super strong. When you like a particular thing, and we all are very individualistic today, we have our all individual likings and dislikes, and we all consume content in different ways. And there we follow different people, right? And the moment that association becomes a stronghold for brands, I think it's a win-win situation. And that's really, really important. I see the second point about your brand association, that will always be there. I mean, you would still have your brands to go with the top celebrities, either to drive image or mass awareness, and that's a separate game altogether. But imagine the evolution of influencer. Imagine that from CPM. Remember I said earlier in the conversation that you used to sell Google on CPM, and today Google is all about CPA. Imagine a scenario where you can buy influencer on a CPA. That's, again, I'm not saying it's just a payment model, but I'm just saying in an ideal scenario, imagine that scenario and how effective it will be for advertising. And for all the people who are technical, I would say it becomes not as the marketing cost, it becomes cost of goods sold. So when you're looking at a P&L or a balance sheet from an advertiser perspective or a brand perspective, you are paying X amount of money. Are you getting Y transactions? Ideally, it should shift from your marketing or advertising budgets to cost of goods sold. And then you have unlimited budgets.
I think what you're saying is extremely insightful. Cost of goods sold, because the part of the marketing and the part of the construct of the product is the imagery around it. So why are you taking it as a separate budget? Because the product itself is, the imagery is embedded into the product. Otherwise, why would I buy Dr. Dre? I mean,
absolutely. So that's what, coming back to Rajesh's question, that's what I'm really bullish about, Rajesh. And that's the reason that I'm personally going ahead with this investment and the opportunity.
So fantastic, Gulrez. I think you're now at the cutting edge of two amazing trends in the future. Of course, Africa and Middle East, especially Africa with its billion people. And what you spoke about, influencer marketing, you've always been ahead of the times. Wish you the very best in your new venture. And it's been a fantastic conversation. I think we've covered a lot of ground, a lot of insights for both practitioners and for entrepreneurs. And for people like me who are looking to do some acquisitions, I think very, very good inputs. Fantastic conversation. Jaimit?
Yeah, I think it's Gulrez has tried to touch on so many topics in 1 hour. It's talking about entrepreneurship and basic cash flow. Yeah, means I cannot believe it, the amount of companies that believe that they're making profit and just go bankrupt because the cash flow just mismatches. And I think a lot of young
invoice. Remember that, don't forget that.
Always that pink invoice. Pink chashma, pink invoice, then you are a success.
Red chashma and fluorescent pink invoices.
Red chashma, fluorescent pink invoice. No, I think it's a very interesting thing, the ability to stand out in what you're doing and the basic thing of trying to get some of your cash flows going right. I think, Gulrez, it's a very insightful point. And I think influencer marketing, you're right. It is not, yes, one may look at it as a tick mark today, but it has a strategic nuance to it. And if you want to play with Google and YouTubes of the world, there are ways to play with it without giving them the Facebook, YouTube tax. There is a way to get your brand association. You're trying to get your eyeballs. You're trying to get some of that loyalty. You're trying to get a lot of it into core loyal raving fans through people who they care about. I think what you're saying is beautiful. I think it ends beautifully on the kind of 1 hour that we have. Thank you, Gulrez, for being with us. Thank you, audience. for staying with us, and click and subscribe on HippoBrain. Do press the bell icon on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you have it.